great. Thank you so much for coming around. Thanks for the cue. And yeah, also very delightful to see some familiar faces. In the next 15 minutes, and I hope I get to 15 minutes, I'll try to give you an introduction of design of organizations. This might be interesting for those of you who either are starting an organization or already are participating on one or have started a company to improve theirs, but also for contributors, because in essence, even if you contribute to an organization, you're in some ways also co-designing it through like governance mechanisms. Before I go into detail, I want to also emphasize and kind of thank everybody who's participated in the organization Deep Work so far. It's built over the last 4 years, and it's only people who wanted and who are interested in doing the work that they're doing. Nobody, they have no obligation to work there, and yet over the last 4 years, they built over 40 different projects. Some of you, some of you will recognize many of the projects. How many of you are either business owners or freelancers? Just like to get an idea. Okay, cool. I'm asking because I also, this is interesting because I also kind of observing the trend of people slowly transitioning more and more into like self-owned work or like freelance kind of infrastructure. I think people are looking for more meaning outside of the kind of enclosed working environments, and I think they're right. Most of the reasons for that are probably rooted in the way that people actually perceive work. So this is just a quick historical background. Organizational work in itself has been going through a transition of how people understood it. So before the Middle Ages, it was just considered a part of life. Like you sleep, you eat, you work, that's fine. Now it's more something like a disutility, and it went through the Middle Ages. Christian chauvinists decided that doing good work, hard work, makes you a good person because you're earning profits, because the profits go to the church distributes it across the poor, God thinks that's a cool thing. So that's why you are now part of society if you do hard work. The same mental model is a transition to the industrialization, except now it's the factory owners who decide on how to distribute the profits. But the idea of hard work being still part of being a good person, regardless of whether you like it or not, has persisted so far. And the reason why I'm kind of explaining this or mentioning that is because I think that we shouldn't design, or we can't and we shouldn't approach design of organizations with that perspective of work being a disutility or something that people don't like, because we want them to participate in the organizations. We want them to find meaning in what they're working on. And people or us, we all like participating to things that we enjoy and find collaboration and find fair compensation for. So I think the kind of core premise should be different, where we focus on kind of what's the important things that are meaningful to us. And it's a very messy path. That's normal. Those of you who have businesses or freelancers know that you have to go through a lot of chaos until you actually converge into something that is meaningful. There's essentially, I would say, 3 things that help with that, which is you gain confidence in your personal abilities. So you're kind of observing like what problem are you solving, and you're trying to figure out what's like define your personal abilities to do the work. You want to specialize in that as much as possible, and you want to projectize in order to communicate that to your environment as much as possible. And then these things you kind of bounce off your environment, which is your stakeholders, clients, or friends, and through that communication you're kind of defining the meaning of your work over time. And what's important about this, and what I kind of see also working with a lot of teams on design, is that a lot of them are trying to kind of outsource a lot of the ideas, a lot of the work, but I think that I encourage people to kind of drive back to the core of like, what are you good at, and stay with that, because that also helps attacking a much greater environment if you then have multiple people working on the same problem area, and like the environment, or like the environment of your value expands from that. And it's also an opportunity for us as organizational designers to actually create the environments that are favorable for people. So making sure that individuals can, like what we do as, as self-sufficient people, like eat, sleep, and eat well, sleep, exercise, we can build the environments that also facilitate these things, because then they also become points of attractors for people to come in and start contributing. which is also important because now you want to also kind of be transparent about these things. So if you want to kind of design an organization and attract people, I think transparency is one of the also key areas to touch on, because that's the only thing that's really relevant for people if they want to know what's going on. So they need to know what work is being done and who is doing what. And so you don't need like entertainment or memes or anything to attract people. You just need to communicate these things. As long as they're favorable, people will just flock towards, and then it kind of will mimic things like dynamics like from online forums like Reddit, where people just like come because it's interesting, they do the work, and they leave if they don't want to, or they stick around because they think it's nice. I also think that being very transparent about financial data is a useful thing, although with a caveat, because transparency is kind of a spectrum. So I would lean towards the full transparency, but keep in mind that the individuals and the workers are still the ones to decide how to deal with that transparency, how to deal with that data, so what they want to share as part of their personal reputation. So you can be transparent about the work, but then also like some people might not want to identify themselves with certain organizations or certain work. It's a more complicated topic I'm happy to talk about separately, but this is just to keep in mind if you want to be transparent about organizational design. So in terms of organizations in general, I think the mental model is also something, again, as a combination of the permissionlessness of online forums. And by the way, I don't think that DAOs, as we, by textbook definition, really exist yet. Also following up with a talk before me. But I think that we're getting there if we can follow the right kind of principles. So on one side, I think it's kind of mimicking the permissionlessness of online forums and communities like Reddit. But on the other side, we want a combination with a sustainable business model, and kind of the merge of that is something that I would say that replicates the ideas of what we see in DAOs. There's also excellent research done by my friends from Block Science, Kelsey Nevin and Michael Zargam, on the viable system model, which I also can recommend kind of going deeper into. But it's like very technical model of how an organization can also kind of fractalize. So from going to design, there's actually only one principle that I would recommend sticking to, or like if there was one thing to remember from this, then this is probably, well, all of them are important, but this is very designy. So whether you're designing a product or an organization, you basically want to look at what people, or observe what people are already doing, or like their behaviors in the organization, and then help them do more of the things that you think are beneficial for the whole. And then you're automating the way that you help them do more of that. So essentially kind of looking at what's going on anyway, and then you're building constraints so they do more of the things that are good for the whole and less of the things that are not good for the whole. So these little pink dots are like people, and the blue text is like behaviors, at least with like my organization, or not mine, but the one that I designed. And it's also similar with like any product. So this is just an example from the ETH Launchpad. You have the same kind of dynamics. You first look at what people are doing anyway, and then you're designing the constraints, and you merge what's good for the collective with what people already are doing, because that are going to be the things that are also meaningful activities and people will consider to be meaningful work. Okay, another thing, I just need to drink. Sorry, this is probably the most important thing, but also the most complicated. So it might sound a bit simple to say, but I think if you want to go and design organizations that are organic and adaptable to their environment, we need some model of how to kind of organize so that we have the awareness of what's going on outside. And so my personal approach is basically transitioning as much as possible from purely work-stream-based work to project-based work as much as possible, with the idea, with the intention to have recurring projects so that you define very specifically what you're working on. So the process of like what exactly needs to be done, the duration, how long a project is taking, and the outcome. And then obviously you can attach the cost and the profit margin, and that's going to be your price that you can also check back with a stakeholder or client. But that basically allows you to, first of all, communicate what's going on really clearly, but also to, over time, have these kind of recurring check-ins, almost like being more mindful in what your work consists of on a long-term basis. So finishing a project, then having a retrospective, finishing another project. And even if the project is on average like pretty much the same, that will make sure that everybody constantly keeps learning and everybody keeps being aware of what's going on outside. It also has a lot of side effects, like people have more ability to negotiate their compensation every single time, or they start focusing on interpersonal relationships because they know that by any type of project, any project, they can basically be left out of the organization. So they try to focus on making their relationships a lot more sustainable. And it also decentralizes kind of risk, because if there's no work in the organization, then nobody needs to sit around and do nothing, because you're able to just say, okay, well, here's the project, and if there's no project, people just don't participate because they're freelancers, and that incentivizes them to look for other places of work, for example, or just do other things and spend their time in a more meaningful way. And of course, what a project is defined by can be very different, so everyone has a different perspective. So this is probably like the last part that I want to touch on, which is soft governance over algorithmic governance or token-based governance. Governance essentially is just like making decisions together, and it's been around for a long time, so it's not necessarily connected to just tokens, but I think design thinking is a really good tool to align people on exactly what are the specifics of a project or specifics of certain decisions, especially if it's in a conversation, because if you drive that out into like a more broader token-based system, like on Snapshot or something, then you'll always have an amount of people that will disagree with the decision eventually. So yeah, I can recommend looking into design thinking practices, or like using Miro for these things. It's or Post-its. It's very handy. Google has a project called Google Aristotle that I also recommend looking into. It's basically spent 3 or 4 years researching the best team possible. And so all of that doesn't really require any Web3-based tools at all. So I know this is a crypto conference, but none of these things are really like super novel. It's just a combination of things that help shape and shift and see work from a bit of a different perspective, but also with tools that already exist. So you can use Typeform and Zapier for an interface that's connected to data that can connect to anything, like a lot of different platforms. If you want to track reputation, Discord has the roles. I use them to just basically say, like, if someone completes a project, that's their badge now, or like their role, because they have been completing the same project for a very long time. And you can let them attest them anyway. Documentation of work, also the speaker before me was mentioning how important the documentation is. Specify exactly what needs to be worked on and who is working on what. What needs to be worked on, Gitbook is great. Google Sheets is for financial data, who's working on what. You can also go through Asana or Notion. All of these let you have a public view that's also visible to anyone, and anyone can kind of look in and then see, oh, that might be something for me. And then people come in and write you a message, hey, can I contribute to that project? And then you see if you want to work with them. Sobel is a great tool also, a little bit of a different perspective. It just shows the actual roles so that people can find who is working on what. It also has a Discord integration, so if you have the Discord roles that specify the tasks or the projects, then you can kind of tag them here and dynamically make it visible. So yeah, and I'm also building, or like I built an MVP that kind of summarizes all of these principles, although that is more, first of all, it's just an MVP, but also it's more focused on existing businesses that have a profitable model already, and that also employ only freelancers, so I don't know how much that applies to you. But you can still check it out and give me feedback if you think it's worth improving in any way. So yeah, I know this, like I'm just barely scratching the surface of all these topics. So talked about innovation as a process, radical transparency, design for emergence, project-based work, soft governance. If you have any other questions or comments, I'm happy to elaborate on all of these things. I also have a Twitter and an Instagram. You can add me there and send me a message. I read through all the messages and I reply to all of the messages. And yeah, last but not least, thank you so much for your interest in design.